Chapter 36, with apologies for my voice, I'm feeling a bit under the weather. Jussive noun clauses are how you report orders, you report commands. In English, we say, he ordered her to study. We use the infinitive, to study. Latin often doesn't use the infinitive in places English does. It uses the subjunctive instead, and that's the case here. So a jussive noun clause is when you're going to report that somebody ordered somebody else to do something. You're going to set it up with your main verb in whatever case, it can be whatever you want. Some impero, obviously it's got to be a verb of commanding, so impero or rogo or peto or persuado or lots of verbs you can do this with. Though notably not eubeo, coming back to that. But you use your verb of ordering, and then you can put a direct object to that if that's an accusative. So manuit eos, he ordered them, or he warned them rather. Or you could use the dative with imperos or imperavit. Eis would be he ordered them, right? In the dative. So you have your object, then you use ut or ne to set up a positive or a negative command clause, and then you put, this is the weird bit, this is the bit that's not like English, you don't use the infinitive, you use the subjunctive with an appropriately conjugated verb that's being ordered, the subordinated verb that's being ordered in the subjunctive. So if we look at our examples here, let's see if I can get all of them on the page. Here we go. So imperavit vobis, he ordered y'all, he commands y'all, that y'all should do this. Notice we have a vobis here as the dative object of to order, and you've got a second person plural subjunctive verb in the subordinate clause to do this. He ordered y'all that you should do this, is a sort of clumsy way to do that, to translate this. These function identically to result and purpose clauses, right? And there is a sort of way of thinking about this like it's a sort of result clause, right? He ordered him with the result that, or even for the purpose that, you would do this. It's structurally the same, little clumsy not to translate this as a sort of proper command. Something like, he asked, from them. Interesting little variation in the theme, but you can put whatever sort of stuff you want in the finite clause, that they should not do this. Okay, so that's not really tricky there. There's nothing really new. You are learning that you can use what looks like a result or purpose clause, this ut plus a subjunctive, to create indirect reported commands called jussive clauses. One interesting thing about this that you might have skipped over, where you not have me to guide you through the reading, is that eubeo takes the construction that English does, takes the construction that Latin doesn't usually. That is, it just takes a infinitive supplement. So, eubeo studere, I order you to study, or I guess to be zealous, but yeah, whatever. I order you to infinitive. And then presumably you could use an accusative subject with that infinitive. So the most common, or maybe not the most common, but the first verb you learned for ordering, eubeo, the one ironically from which we get the word jussive, is the one that doesn't take jussive clauses, which doesn't make any sense, but it's true. Likewise, you can use forms of volo, nolo molo, the I want, don't want, and prefer clauses, for a kind of ordering. Fieri factus sum. Okay, so we probably talked about this before, but this is something called a suppletive verb. A suppletive verb is a verb that doesn't have all of its parts of its own, so it borrows parts from other verb forms, some of which survive in the language and some of which don't. In English, the example that I always use is in English, our verb to go has lost its past tense. It no longer has a proper past tense, so it borrowed the past tense of the verb to wind. So you say, I go to the store, and I went to the store, which is the old past tense of to went. That's called a suppletive verb. And they use the language at least once in here. A sort of suppletion, which is a word they just drop in there without any explanation. Not entirely helpful. Um, so there's, and this is a really complicated one. This is actually more mixed up than other suppletive verbs. So we've already seen suppletive verbs with pharaoh, tuli, pharaoh, fere, tuli, latum. This is more complicated because it's not just borrowing a different verb's perfect tense or something like that. Instead, the theo here is used in place of the passive for facio, and then facio's perfect is used, well, facio is used in the passive construction for the perfect as a sort of deponent perfect for theo. I know. So look up here. You see that you can see this from the entry. So if we're just thinking about theo, which is what we're doing here, so you can sort of set aside that facio doesn't have its own passive, so you use theo in active forms as if it were passive. So that's in one sort of class of weirdness. And then here you see there's only three principal parts, which is usually what you get with deponents. And notice that the infinitive fieri is the passive form, but theo looks active. And then the perfect comes from factus sum, which looks like the perfect passive construction of facio, and indeed it is. Here, playing pitch hitter for the perfect active. It's not clear to me that theo is even like active, but okay, let's say it is. Let's say theo is active, and then factus sum is playing the perfect active, the third principal part purpose for theo. It's sort of all complicated because these are what are called copulative verbs. They're verbs that do some kind of equation between the subject and the predicate. Most of the time, they also have stative functions. But when it means become or to be made to be, those uses, you're drawing a sort of equivalence between the subject and the predicate. When it means to occur, to happen, less so. That's a sort of what we might call a stative, that's just describing the state of a thing, an intransitive, if you will. So then there's not going to be any object, right? If something happens, there's no object, no predicate with that. It just, well, the predicate is the verb, right? There's no additional predicate noun. So look at the forms in this. You'll see that it's conceptually all mixed up, but in practice, it looks like a present active, imperfect active, future active, like you'd expect for a third. And yeah, it's not all together terribly complicated. I'd read through these. So, a fourth. Looks like a fourth. They're kind of the same in the future when they're not class. So, anyways, I hope you all enjoy exploring forms of theo and jussive clauses.